Have you ever wondered why the jolliest season of the year, the season of sparkling lights, carols, and laughter, hides secrets darker than the chill in the winter air? What if the stories you were told as a child of Santa Claus sliding down chimneys with gifts were only half the truth? Shadows of an older, more disturbing tradition where joy and dread were inseparable companions. Every wreath you hang, every candle you light, every ornament you place carries echoes of centuries-old fears, rituals, and warnings carefully disguised beneath tinsel and cheer. Imagine standing beneath a towering Christmas tree in a crowded living room, feeling the warmth of the lights, the smell of pine and sugar, yet sensing an unease you cannot name, a subtle pulse in your chest that whispers, "The world is not as safe as it seems." Why do certain symbols appear year after year, their meanings hidden from casual observation? Why do some carols, when studied closely, contain lyrics so haunting they were censored or forgotten, warning of spirits, punishment, or sudden death? Why do the stories of Saint Nicholas, the kindly gift giver, trace back to figures whose methods of enforcing morality involved fear, pain, and even public shaming? Perhaps Christmas was never meant to be entirely joyful. Perhaps it was always meant to balance light and shadow, joy and dread, faith and fear. In some European regions, the night before Christmas was considered a threshold when spirits roamed freely, when the dead walked among the living, and when children were warned that misbehavior could summon consequences far more terrifying than a lump of coal. These warnings were not mere cautionary tales. They were rooted in rituals designed to protect communities from dangers now lost to history. In medieval villages, townsfolk would perform ceremonies in the dead of winter, dressing as monstrous creatures, with masks carved from human-like faces, parading through streets to scare away malevolent spirits, a practice so grotesque it was later deemed unfit for polite society. The modern Santa Claus, a jolly man in red, is an amalgamation of centuries of folklore, sanitized to shield children from the terrifying reality of the original tales. But if we trace the history carefully, we find figures who punished the naughty in gruesome ways, who kept lists not merely to give gifts, but to enforce obedience through terror. Consider Krampus, the horned companion of St. Nicholas, whose sack reportedly carried children away if they misbehaved, a legend that teetered on the edge of myth and real-world dread. And beyond Europe, in the far north, shamanic traditions associated with midwinter involved guiding the dead, interpreting omens, and performing ceremonies that modern sensibilities would call sinister. Yet these rites were vital to survival in the darkness, a means of communicating with unseen forces to ensure life continued. Every tinsel-covered branch, every candy cane hung with cheer, is rooted in a deeper tapestry, one threaded with fear, obsession, and the human need to control what cannot be controlled. Even the colors we associate with Christmas, red and green, have origins tied to pagan fertility rites and blood symbolism, a subtle reminder that celebration and danger were once inseparable. In some regions, winter solstice festivals involved sacrifice, both symbolic and real, to ensure the sun's return. And over time, these rites were folded into Christian traditions, rewritten to feel safe, cheerful, and benign. The Yule log, a centerpiece of cozy fireside tradition, once served a more complex purpose: to absorb evil spirits into burning wood and release protection for the household, a ritual that combined fear and hope, power and superstition. And what of the old carols, whose verses contain references to darkness, wandering spirits, and judgment, lines that were scrubbed from modern hymnals? Even popular children's rhymes hide echoes of punishment, morality, and mortality, reminders of a world in which winter was long, harsh, and unforgiving. And yet we continue to celebrate, clinging to the illusion that the season is only light, warmth, and giving. Perhaps this is why, when we look back, Christmas is a season of contradictions. Families gather in warmth, while the darkness outside holds its own ceremonies, its own chilling narratives, its own quiet threats. Scholars have found references to witches, demons, and spectral warnings embedded in traditions as innocuous as hanging stockings or leaving out cookies. Even the gifts themselves, once symbolic of appeasing forces or asserting moral lessons, have been transformed into consumer objects, stripped of their ominous undertones, but still carrying the ghost of their original purpose. As the world sings and laughs, the shadows of past winters linger, and they are waiting. Perhaps one night, when the lights are dim, when snow muffles the streets, one could stumble upon what was always meant to be hidden, a reminder that the history of Christmas is darker, stranger, and more unsettling than we dare to imagine. The next time you feel a shiver near the tree or notice a flicker of candlelight that seems too deliberate, consider that you are sensing what our ancestors always knew. Joy and fear have danced together in the season of lights for longer than most dare to remember, and some of those shadows have never truly left. And now, as the music fades into the quiet, the lingering question remains: how much of the Christmas you know is real, and how much has been carefully rewritten to hide the truths no one wanted you to uncover? Beneath the gleaming ornaments and cheerful songs of Christmas lies a history so obscured that most people would refuse to believe it if it were told plainly. A story of forgotten rituals, hidden figures, and unsettling customs that stretch across centuries and continents. Practices that were once as normal as hanging stockings, but now vanish from memory like smoke in the wind. Long before candy canes and holiday cards, winter celebrations were deeply intertwined with survival, fear, and human attempts to control forces they could not comprehend. Villagers would offer sacrifices to spirits of the forest and household demons alike, rituals designed to ensure health, fertility, and protection from disease during the deadliest months of the year. And those who failed to observe these rites risked far more than shame. They risked being ostracized, cursed, or even killed. In the Scandinavian North, Yule was not just a festival of feasting, but a liminal period when the dead were believed to walk among the living, when trolls and spirits roamed freely, and when the line between the human world and the supernatural was perilously thin, demanding vigilance, offerings, and fearful respect. Ancient Germanic tribes, whose customs would later merge into what we now call Christmas, had complex ceremonies involving fire, blood, and masks, intended to purify communities and intimidate unseen forces. Yet these same traditions eventually became intertwined with Christian symbolism, sanitized into warmth and merriment, while their original, darker meanings were buried under layers of mythology. The Christianization of these rituals did not erase fear, it transformed it, codifying morality into gift-giving and behavior lists, creating a narrative in which compliance led to rewards and disobedience to symbolic or spiritual punishment, a psychological framework that subtly reinforced control through generations. Historical accounts reveal disturbing practices. In parts of Central Europe, the night of December 5th, Krampusnacht, involved frightening, elaborate parades where adults in terrifying masks would chase children through the streets, whipping them lightly as a warning, while local authorities documented that the line between theatrical performance and genuine terror was often thin, with real injuries sometimes occurring. Even in England, Christmas included mummers' plays and guise dancing, where disguised figures roamed neighborhoods, their intentions unclear to those who watched, sometimes begging for food, sometimes enacting symbolic battles, occasionally hinting at ritualistic undertones that modern observers cannot fully decode. In France, the tradition of Père Fouettard, a dark companion to Saint Nicholas, punished the misbehaving by whipping or confinement, a vivid reminder that generosity and fear were inseparable in early European celebrations. The foods we now consider traditional, from roasted meats to spiced cakes, often tied to ceremonial offerings intended to honor gods, spirits, and ancestors. The feasting itself carried psychological weight, reminding people that survival depended not only on provisions, but also on adhering to deeply embedded cultural norms. Meanwhile, in Eastern Europe, rituals involved placing protective charms in homes and barns, lighting fires to ward off evil spirits, and reciting chants to guide wandering souls safely through the darkness, a blend of superstition and spiritual care that many modern observers would find alien, unsettling, or even macabre. Even the figure of Santa Claus, so beloved today, was built on layers of forgotten figures, some saintly, some terrifying, from the 4th century St. Nicholas, whose acts of generosity were historically select. While modern Christmas dazzles with lights, carols, and cheerful family gatherings, beneath the glittering surface lie customs so strange, dark, and controversial that they are almost unrecognizable today. Practices that once held communities in a delicate balance of fear and awe, rituals that were meant to teach, punish, or terrify. Across Europe, ancient winter traditions mixed pagan rites with emerging Christian beliefs, creating a tapestry of practices that could be simultaneously joyous and horrifying. In Austria, Bavaria, and parts of northern Italy, the figure of Krampus dominates folklore, a horned, demonic companion to St. Nicholas, tasked not with delivering gifts, but with punishing the disobedient, often depicted with chains, birch switches, and a sack for abducting children, a terrifying embodiment of morality enforced through dread. While now largely symbolic, historical accounts suggest that families would use Krampus-like figures to frighten children into compliance, walking streets in grotesque masks, striking fear into hearts with shrieks and sudden appearances, rituals that blurred the line between performance and real danger. In some alpine villages, adults would actually masquerade as Krampus, wielding whips or rods, and tales survive of children being locked in dark rooms or tied to stakes as part of cautionary demonstrations, events that were recorded in parish records as both spectacle and warning. Beyond Europe, traditions could be even stranger. In parts of Scandinavia, men disguised as Yule lads or trolls would enter homes at night, hiding in shadows, leaving gifts or mischief depending on the household's behavior, a reminder that morality was monitored by unseen eyes and misdeeds were never entirely without consequence. In Iceland, the 13 Yule lads descend one by one during the final 13 nights before Christmas, leaving gifts for well-behaved children, but rotting potatoes for the naughty, a system that combines anticipation with subtle psychological pressure, ensuring children internalize moral codes through ritualized fear. In France, Père Fouettard, the dark companion of St. Nicholas, was known to chase and whip misbehaving children, a figure whose name translates to Father Whipper, whose presence lingered in homes long after the ritual had ended, a shadow hovering behind candlelight and cheerful carols. Some villages took these practices to extremes, staging elaborate wild man or wildeman rituals during midwinter, where men in furs and masks would storm homes, brandishing clubs or sticks, their intentions semi-ritualistic, semi-chaotic, often leaving observers terrified yet strangely exhilarated, a celebration that fused fear, folklore, and communal catharsis. Across cultures, certain foods and decorations also carried dark meanings. Holly and ivy, beyond their bright appearance, were believed to ward off evil spirits. Yule logs were burned not just for warmth, but to absorb maleficent forces. Candy and sweets were left as offerings to appease wandering souls, and missing or misplaced rituals could result in supernatural punishment in local belief. Even Christmas carols were not innocent. Older verses describe spectral visits, divine judgment, and moral warnings, lyrics that were often suppressed over time to create a safer, more cheerful narrative. And yet, the psychological imprint of these rituals remains. Humans are wired to respond to fear, anticipation, and pattern, and Christmas's dark traditions, now sanitized, still stir the subconscious in subtle ways, creating a blend of joy and unease that persists even in modern living rooms. Some scholars suggest that the continued fascination with scary Christmas tales, horror movies set during the season, and urban legends about the holiday's sinister origins is a cultural echo of these older rituals, the remnants of centuries-old practices designed to teach through dread, now transformed into entertainment. But what if the line between past and present is thinner than we realize? Reports of ritualized behavior, mysterious appearances, and local legends that refuse to die suggest that the spirit of these dark traditions never fully disappeared. In the dead of night, when the world is silent and the only light comes from Christmas candles or the glow of a tree, it is not hard to imagine the shadows lengthening, figures in masks wandering through streets, or the faint echo of chains rattling as they patrol the borders between order and chaos. These traditions reveal a side of Christmas that few acknowledge. The season was as much about enforcing morality, preparing for death, and acknowledging unseen powers as it was about joy, family, and giving. The grotesque, the mischievous, and the terrifying were not anomalies, they were central, woven into the very fabric of the festival, a psychological framework that ensured survival in harsh, unpredictable winters. A world in which misbehavior had consequences beyond parental scolding. And so as we hang lights, wrap gifts, and sing songs of peace and goodwill, it is worth remembering that beneath the bright surface of celebration lies a shadowed undercurrent, a current that is older, darker, and far more complex than the sanitized Christmas stories we now tell. There are places in Europe, tucked away in valleys and forests, where masks and rituals persist in some form, where adults still play the roles of Krampus or Yule lads, and where the old chants can still be heard on winter nights. These are the living remnants of a past in which fear and festivity were inseparable, and as we look toward the warmth of our decorated trees, the flicker of candlelight, and the laughter of children, one cannot help but wonder, if these ancient shadows were never fully banished, could they still linger, unseen, in the corners of our modern celebrations, waiting for the quietest, coldest night to remind us that Christmas was never meant to be purely safe? Beneath the twinkling lights, jingling bells, and joyous carols, Christmas carries a psychological weight that few pause to consider, a shadow that has quietly shaped human behavior, emotion, and culture for centuries, influencing the way communities think about morality, guilt, and social cohesion, while embedding subtle fears into the subconscious of children and adults alike. From its earliest iterations, Christmas was never solely a celebration. It was a tool for regulating behavior, for guiding societies through the harshest season of the year, a psychological framework built on reward and punishment, hope and dread, community and isolation. Scholars examining historical texts note that the fear of Krampus, Père Fouettard, and other punitive figures instilled moral lessons not through logic or reason, but through visceral emotional experiences, teaching obedience by embedding anxiety deep within the psyche, a technique remarkably effective in shaping social norms that persist even in sanitized modern versions. The anticipation of judgment, the thrill of mystery, and the tension of potential consequence created a seasonal pressure cooker of emotions, amplifying both joy and fear, a duality that survives in subtle ways. The anxiety of shopping deadlines, the worry about gifts, the fear of failing to create a perfect holiday experience, echoing the same psychological mechanisms as centuries-old rituals. Christmas also interacts with memory in profound ways. Studies show that the season evokes nostalgia more intensely than other holidays, but this nostalgia is intertwined with shadows of loss, loneliness, and longing, amplifying emotions that can be both comforting and unsettling. Families gather to relive traditions, often unaware that these rituals, originally designed to manage uncertainty and mortality, now act as emotional triggers, stirring anxieties while offering a sense of continuity and safety.
Even symbols like the Christmas tree, stockings, and wreaths carry psychological resonance. Pine scents stimulate memory and emotion, lights capture attention and create a sense of wonder, and small gifts act as tokens of social reciprocity, all rooted in ancient human instincts for reward, survival, and social cohesion. In modern societies, the commercialization of Christmas has added layers of complexity, amplifying pressure, expectation, and guilt. Yet the underlying emotional machinery remains the same as it was in the past: compliance, reward, punishment, and social evaluation, all wrapped in a festive package. The darkness beneath the lights is not merely metaphorical. Countless psychological studies note increased stress, anxiety, and depression during the holiday season, phenomena that are linked not only to social pressure and family dynamics, but also to the seasonal environment itself, echoes of our ancestors' fears of winter scarcity and isolation. In historical contexts, fear was often direct. The threat of punishment from spirits, masks, or moral enforcers like Krampus created tangible consequences, a form of cognitive conditioning that shaped behavior in ways modern parents unconsciously replicate, rewarding children for good behavior and warning them against missteps, often in dramatic and emotionally charged ways. The cultural impact extends beyond individual psychology. Christmas rituals have long reinforced societal hierarchies, gender roles, and communal cohesion, emphasizing obedience, generosity, and conformity, while suppressing dissent and managing the collective anxiety of winter. Even music contributes. Carols and chants, with their predictable patterns, minor key undertones, and references to judgment or warning, act as emotional primers, subtly influencing mood, reinforcing collective identity, and echoing centuries of ritualized behavior. Anthropologists note that the very act of storytelling during the season,
As the twinkle of lights fades and the last carol drifts into silence, Christmas leaves behind more than gifts and memories. It leaves an echo, a quiet psychological imprint that lingers long after the holiday itself has passed, a reminder that joy and fear, celebration and shadow have always been inseparable. This season, so carefully curated to evoke warmth and love, is also a mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties, desires, and moral consciousness, shaped over centuries by rituals that combined wonder with dread, storytelling with judgment, and light with darkness. Consider the layers of meaning that have accumulated over time. The jolly Santa we embrace today is the product of legends, myths, and folklore, but beneath the cheerful facade lies a history of moral surveillance, punitive companions, and rituals designed to manipulate attention, behavior, and emotion. The very act of gathering, feasting, and exchanging gifts has roots in communal survival strategies, psychological conditioning, and ancestral attempts to reconcile human fears of scarcity, mortality, and the unknown with moments of beauty, generosity, and connection. Even the smallest traditions, hanging stockings, lighting candles, decorating trees, carry echoes of centuries-old beliefs. A candle's glow warding off spirits, the evergreen symbolizing continuity and protection, gifts as tokens of both reward and social expectation, and the music that accompanies them subtly priming the mind for memory, emotion, and reflection. Psychologists have long noted that rituals, particularly those repeated annually, create a sense of temporal continuity, reinforcing identity, shared values, and emotional resilience. And Christmas, more than any other holiday, is layered with these structures, combining anticipation, anxiety, and celebration in ways that are profoundly human. The emotional impact is heightened because, historically, the stakes were real. Failure to adhere to ritual could mean social ostracism, supernatural retribution, or even death. The modern era, thankfully, has replaced these literal threats with symbolic ones, yet the brain responds as if the stakes remain, producing tension alongside joy. This duality, the simultaneous presence of safety and fear, hope and moral pressure, creates a rich emotional tapestry that resonates deeply, explaining why Christmas can feel overwhelming, exhilarating, nostalgic, and unsettling all at once.
Across cultures, even as customs diverged and evolved, the underlying psychological mechanisms persisted, embedding moral lessons, social norms, and collective anxieties into the heart of the celebration. From the Yule lads of Iceland to the Krampus of the Alps, from the dark chants of medieval carols to the modern glittering tree, humans have encoded survival strategies, ethical frameworks, and emotional triggers into the ritual fabric of the holiday, a subtle architecture that continues to guide behavior without conscious awareness. Beyond individual psychology, Christmas has always reflected societal structures. Hierarchies, gender roles, communal expectations, and social cohesion were reinforced through shared practices, reward and punishment, and the anticipation of judgment, whether divine, folkloric, or communal. In this sense, every act of giving, every gesture of kindness or mischief, every moment of reflection carries centuries of human intention, fear, and hope, distilled into a ritual that is at once intimate and universal. Perhaps this is why the holiday remains so compelling, so emotionally charged. It taps into the deepest wells of human experience, from love and generosity to fear and guilt, reminding us that every light has a shadow, every gift a lesson, and every carol a story older than the melody itself. And yet, despite, or perhaps because of these shadows, Christmas retains its power to unite, to inspire wonder, to create moments of profound emotional clarity, moments in which the weight of history, tradition, and human psychology converge into something both haunting and beautiful. When we pause beneath the glow of a tree or hear the distant echo of a familiar carol, we are, in a way, communing with our ancestors, feeling their fears, their hopes, their rituals, and the lessons they encoded into the season. It is a reminder that every celebration carries layers we may not fully understand, and that part of the magic and the unease comes from this interplay between visible joy and invisible shadow. Perhaps the final truth of Christmas is not simply that it is a season of giving or family or light, but that it is a mirror of the human heart itself, complex, contradictory, capable of wonder and fear, beauty and darkness, memory and projection. And as we look ahead, as the candles burn low and the world falls silent outside our doors, one question lingers, subtle yet insistent. If the shadows of centuries past still shape our hearts, our behavior, and our stories, how much of who we are during this season is truly our own, and how much is the echo of fears, rituals, and lessons whispered across generations, waiting to be noticed, waiting to remind us that the light is always defined by the darkness that surrounds it?